I am Lorenzo Cardim. I was born in Brazil, born and raised in Brazil. I moved to the US after I was finished with high school. I've spent a few years dancing. I was a competitive figure skater in the area, and went back to school. I studied here in DC at the Corcoran to get my BFA, and then I moved to San Francisco for my MFA, and I just moved back 4 years ago. I've been working in the area ever since. I work with sculpture, performance, video, and pretty much interdisciplinary.
Fabulous. Yeah, so I am curious, could you tell us where you're working now that the pandemic has hit and where your is typically? I met you at Red Dirt Studio in Tacoma Park, but I hear you've since moved elsewhere.
Yes. So I moved to Otis at the beginning of last year. And about a month and a half ago, actually, I moved out of Otis. I put my stuff in storage, and I'm actually working in my backyard. I'm carving. When there's a nice day, I'll set up in my backyard and carve. I also work at Catholic University. I'm the director of the fabrication lab for the School of Architecture. I've been there for 3 years now. And we're on break. In a way, we are on quarantine as well.
Well, I'm so glad that you have found a way to keep working at this time. I'd love to go ahead and just dive into some of the artwork. So I'm going to be sharing my screen with everyone at home. Just a reminder, if you would like to participate by asking a question of myself or Lorenzo, you can either send a message through the chat. You can also use the raise hand feature to verbally ask your question. So we'd love to hear that as we go on. So let's go ahead and start by looking at one of your wood sculptural pieces, Holofernes, See You on the Other Side. And so we had a chance to talk about this with the kids earlier and talked about the type of wood that you use for this piece, but also woods that you like to use. Could you talk a little bit about your process to overview for everyone? But I would also love to dive into the title of this piece because I think it references one of my favorite paintings. So I would love to hear about your inspiration as well as your process.
Sure. I work with all media, but I would say since grad school, I've been working primarily in wood. I'm interested in the political aspects of craft and making, and the idea, like the history behind craft, and also like the history, how it's been like related to misogyny and the subjugation of women and queer people, the history of textile. So in a sense, like craft to me like speaks to that language. Carving, it's pretty predominant in my approach. I like wood as a means to talk about masculinity, and then like trying to subvert the ideas of masculinity by interjecting with materials like nail polish, gold, and other things that are like allude to feminine qualities, like that contradiction between the feminine and the masculine, and maybe like figuring out a way to queer that. So all the red that you see in the work is actually nail polish. The gold that you see here is gold, 23 karat gold. And this is redwood pine or yellow pine from the redwood forest in San Francisco. And I spent a huge amount of time just sanding and like polishing the wood to bring out like, like it's like quality.
Yeah.
And the title, Holofernes, See You on the Other Side, is related to Gentileschi's painting of Judith beheading Holofernes. This series, this body of work relates to like my homage to women's liberation. So I created all these pieces that are like pay homage to the women's liberation. So I kind of wanted to like do this piece where like Judith was like decapitating, cutting off his head. And that's the, as if it's an X, an abstraction of an X.
Yeah, and I think it's really interesting how you, somebody asked if we have a view from the top. I think unfortunately we don't have one of this piece, but I will at the end provide my email address, so maybe that's something we can provide. But one thing that strikes me here is just appreciating the qualities of the two forms brought together, and how you're talking about women's liberation and characterizing perhaps the representation of, of femininity in such a square, strong wedge that is this driving, powerful force into a material that we often associate with masculinity, I think, and strength. But that wedge is powerful enough to drive into that. But then even it makes me think so much about like, I think too, with the application of nail polish, but then how you've maintained the live edge of the wood, the curvature of the rings, this organic form. It is challenging in the sense of being masculine and feminine at the same time. So I really love how you've sort of upended these notions with two forms that are simple, not in the sense that like this was very simple to do, but you've managed to keep it uncomplicated in the visual representation, but then the implications of that become very complicated from that, which I appreciate. So this is something that, or this is a piece that people at home may recognize if you did see the timber show. We were so happy to have this on exhibit at Strathmore. I spoke earlier with the kids today about how I've had the pleasure actually of being able to touch this piece with your permission. And I am just struck by how soft the hand is and how human-like it is in not just appearance, but feel. So could you talk about your inspiration for this piece, but also how you achieve even just the look of the tendons in the hand as well?
Yes. So I'm interested in anatomy. I studied anatomy for quite a while, actually. And I think that's like I try to implement, like some kind of like a realistic quality to the work. I've toyed with going more abstract, but in a sense, it's really how like I observe as I carve. For this piece, I kind of wanted for one element, like which is the hand, to feel realistic and have that weight, like in a sense lightness too, but also like for you to really feel the tension and the stretch of of the limp wrist, and so like carving, observing, studying anatomy. I think that's like one of the ways that I'm able to achieve some kind of realism.
Well, I wouldn't say some. You got it. Don't judge yourself there.
It's a work in progress. I think like getting better. Yeah. There's always room for improvement.
And I should say for those at home, the hand is of a larger scale, so it is not life size. It is larger. Somebody asked this, which I've been actually interested in, because in so many ways that piece is floating on the wedge of wood that you have there. So Gail asked, what material did you use to attach the hand?
Mm-hmm. So thank you for the question. I think one of the things that it's part of this concept is where the hands touch. There's like a very little contact. I don't know if you can observe the top of the wrist, what is touching the wedge. It's really barely touching. And then I use two small dowels under the thumb and under the middle finger to anchor them onto that piece of wood. So, and then I painted the dowel with nail polish as well to kind of blend in a little bit. So you can barely see it. But it's removable, for transportation. But the goal is to really create that tension where the hand touches this kind of large piece of lumber to create that tension.
It's interesting. I've often associated the position of this hand and this piece, the gesture with flamenco. I took a flamenco class and was I had a big moment with that in terms of my understanding of dance, because I was so used to, as a child, like taking a ballet class, like flamenco is forceful and there is a femininity behind the strength. And I, was so struck by how strong you have to be in all places of your body, but then your hands, what they do are just so different. So I'm also excited to talk about dance as that has played a large part in your artistic career. So that will be coming up shortly. But you've also been working here with new works. So can you talk about what's going on in your head for these works that you're in progress on?
Yeah, this is a new body of work that I'm almost finishing, actually, this first series. I've been looking at reliquaries, religious gestures, looking at saints. I grew up in Brazil, Catholic. So I kind of I'm revising that history, of the statuary, religious statuary. And I kind of felt this, I wanted to find a way to use that, to express some of the concept that I'm researching right now. There's these really delicate gestures from all the saints, men and women, that of course, they're loaded with symbolism. So I kind of decided to use that as a reference point to really talk about touch and connection. I think a lot of these pieces to me are connected to really the idea of one hand touching another hand or a part of the body, to elucidate connection in skin.
So Lisa asks, is there symbolism in your use of different woods in the hand? I guess this would perhaps mean, actually, this might be speaking to limp wrist, which has a few different stripes here.
Sure. So this is poplar, is the same wood. Just the hand is a hand-carved poplar. It's just poplar comes in different colors. Like shades of green and yellow. And I laminated it actually to accentuate the sinew. Some of my other pieces that I made at the same time, the larger pieces, including the entire arm, you can really see the emulation of the vein, the muscles and veins created by the grain of the poplar. And then poplar kind of either yellows or darkens with time. And I was actually interested in using that too. But yeah, so this is basically all the same way.
Are you continuing to use poplar in these works too?
No, this is basswood and curly basswood. I am actually carving. I just laminated a block of poplar so I can carve that too. But these are mostly bass and curly bass.
And we were speaking about this morning, so that's a little softer and easy to work with.
Yeah, much easier in a sense that it's easier to cut into. And it doesn't damage your tools as quickly, so I don't have to sharpen my tools as often, which gives me a little more, time, to work on the pieces without getting distracted, or interrupting the flow.
So Tony asks, would you share what you love about the process of working with wood?
Sure. One of the things that actually pretty much excites me is how the process of making in wood, to me is directly connected to the process of dancing. When I'm in the studio, when I was in the studio, even in grad school, I wrote a lot about that, how being in the wood shop, moving through the space, having to like learn how to like use the tools, like the repetitive motion, moving around the chords and power tools. It kind of felt to me like a choreography, and of course I wrote about that in my thesis. So it kind of, I think that's kind of like attractive to me, like kind of feeling in connection with my body, and it just really, like, it's peaceful, and I don't know, gives me like stamina too.
Yeah, it does remind me too of perhaps I'm drawn to this illusion just by looking at the image of a hand. But a little more of a personal story, I had a problem that I developed with some nerves in my arm, and it was stimulating numbness and tingling in my hands. And the doctors could not figure out what was wrong until they performed this some kind of electrical nerve test. And the neurologist said, "Are you involved in the arts in any way?" And I said, "Yeah." And he said, it's always either artists or musicians who have as sensitive nerves in their hands as you do. And oftentimes he said that he felt as if either people who had those sensitive nerves sought out very physical, detailed work, such as woodworking, or the opposite, they developed it. So I'm really curious because you seem so drawn to physical movement and all of your mediums. So it's interesting to me that you speak about how it felt like a dance to you. So perhaps your body was just craving it. Who knows?
I think there's just there's definitely a little, I don't know, like a nervous obsession with making. I think a lot of artists feel the same way when we can't make, or somebody tells us that we just can't do something, that we must do it. And I kind of, that energy is definitely present, it could be a little obsession too.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad because you did wonderful work from it.
Thank you.
So here we have a piece called Untitled Zipper, and we have a close-up of that as well. So this kind of gets to some of the abstract ideas of connection and touch that are also present in the more representational work. Can you talk about how this relates to that? And also we have your stitched wood piece here, if you could maybe kind of draw some parallels between them.
I think that these are abstracted ideas, but to me, they're all related to the human form. Zipper, the zipper, the stitch, I'm creating, actually, this is part of another body of work that I'm working on now, creating the hook and eye, this gigantic sculptures that are like moving through this entire wall space. And they are, they're alluding to like things that go on the body. These are also like part of the series that are like my monuments to women's liberation. Like there's like a lot of history behind the zipper, when women were allowed to wear them, and what it did for women's, like the ability to actually even dress yourself with the lace. So like I'm interested in that history. So yes, so alluding to the body, to the human form, so it doesn't have the body itself, but it's definitely connected to that idea.
And for the stitched wood piece, I'm curious to know if these logs, if they were found with the cut, or if that was something created.
No, they were not. They were. These were given to me. They're solid, and I dried them myself in my studio over the summer, and they split. And after they split, I decided to interject them with the stitching. I was reading a book on the history of the construction of femininity by Rosika Parker. It's called Subversive Stitch. And as I was perfect. It's a great book. I highly recommend it. I was reading that book in my studio, and I was looking at these logs, and I thought that I needed to do something with them, and I decided to stitch them up, or lace them up in a way.
And for those who are unfamiliar, in working with wood, one does have to dry the wood first if you want to work from the wood and maintain the size of it. So wood will shrink over time as it loses water. It's like any fruit or vegetable or plant, it does dry out over time. And because of that, it can shrink. So it's really interesting to hear that this happened naturally, but then this intervention that you proceed to create through the stitching. I'm curious to know though, like, were you was it a disappointment for you when it split, and then this was kind of some kind of way of mediating that, or was this a happy surprise?
No, it was a great surprise. I kind of saw the crack when I got the logs. A professor of mine actually gave me this wood. And I saw the cracks. I saw minor cracks. You can actually see on the bottom of the left one. And there's a third piece that is in a collection in San Francisco. So these minor cracks were a telltale that this piece was going to crack. Also, with wood, if you don't remove the core, the center part of the wood, before you do anything with it, it will probably crack. It will split, as they call it. And I didn't do that. I didn't cut it in a quarter. I didn't remove anything. I just decided to just dry it that way. And so there was a high percent chance that it was going to happen. I just didn't know it was going to be like this. So I was pretty happy, That was
it's funny because I try stitching on my own with embroidery, and my medium is like in video, so I'm so used to the immediacy of like editing on a computer. I get frustrated with stitching, and I'm just imagining the patience involved here of working with wood. I really appreciate it, even just for that part. But it's obviously beautiful beyond just the amount of patience and time it took.
Thank you.
So next, I wanted to bring up this piece because it has so much relating to the effect of the zipper and the stitching. You have an interesting story about where this piece is and how it was installed. Would you mind talking about that?
Yeah, this is a public sculpture that was part of my fellowship at a project in Baltimore called Coldstream Homestead Montebello Park. It's part of the park. This is an offsite of the park. It's about 3 blocks away from the main park. And the project was for us to beautify this small park and then install this semi-permanent or permanent works. So my idea was to, the ideal underlying idea was mending. And I wanted to stitch the park, just thinking of like symbolic to stitching the community or mending or healing. So I cut into the land, and then I made this steel structures that you see here. They're painted with enamel, and then I installed them in this park as part of the project. So yeah, so like the underlying concept was, like mending. I worked with the neighborhood for about a year, like gathering stories and talking to people. And I thought that this was kind of like my reaction to what I learned from the neighborhood.
Yeah, and it's really a wonderful placement too, in thinking about how parks function in communities as a joining together, as a place for building community, but also healing community. And I think it's a really beautiful, fitting piece for that space. Abby writes, on the stitched wood sculpture, are either wood pieces supposed to represent man right or woman left? That's how I interpreted it, but just wanted to know what you wanted to convey.
Sure. There are actually 3 pieces. This one is actually a separate piece, is the third piece. These 2 are a pair. The title used to be called Stitched Pair. And sometimes my titles change a little bit. It just kind of, not necessarily. I think that I like to leave that up to the viewer. not, I wasn't thinking of it as that necessarily a man and or a woman or a part in a pair of people.
Right, but it does still evoke a sense of the body as well, you know, and thinking about stitching the body, like as you mentioned, mending, like healing a wound. I at least I get a sense of that too, but
Definitely feel like I'm anthropomorphizing wood.
right,
You know,
right.
for
That's a
sure.
great way to put it. So on to your performance work as well. So I would love to hear, how you became interested in performance work, because I know that you have a background in dance. Could you elaborate on that?
Sure. This was performance was introduced to me when I was at the Corcoran. It was my second year. I was painting. I was a painter actually when I started school there, and I was taking a sculpture class in my second year. And one of the things that kind of like piqued my interest was the fact that I needed the sculptures to do a little more, you know. And then I started making the sculptures that would go on my body, and then animating them in a sense with my body. So I think like that kind of like piqued my interest in movement and bringing my own body into the work. Like this piece, also like my performances, I kind of feel like they're more overtly political in comparison to my other work. Like my sculptures are, I think they are all political, but it's not as overtly overt as the performances. This piece was inspired by the murder of Alex Nieto in San Francisco in 2014. He was shot 14 times, and these are actually ballistic lines, the red lines that police use. And I suspended this gold ring in ballistic lines, and I actually have bullet casings holding the ballistic lines in place. And this was like installed at Arlington Art Center. And then it was like in this black room. It was a beautiful room. And I came in and I did a 15-minute dance performance inside and outside the ring. So it's very, very slow, very quiet piece. But I kind of felt like that ring to me symbolized Nieto himself. And this was like the last few minutes before he was shot down. Like the skin, like my body being part of like a political statement, I think.
Do you find yourself attracted to using performance medium to think about and express more political oriented ideas? I guess I'm curious if it comes from a place where in our society there is the trend to politicize bodies. I think sometimes I want to sort of state like the difference too between being political, but then also being politicized as a person, right? So do you find yourself drawn to this because of when you mention that, or when you talk about the historical inspiration for this piece as being, the murder of this person, do you find that the themes you're tackling oftentimes do have to do with body and concept as much as your medium?
Yeah, I think that it is like it's a way to engage that conversation, and I think that like once you put from what I realized, and also my interest in performance. When I look at other performance work, is like once you see the body in the work, your attention shifts and the conversation shifts. Like I presented the work without the body, just the ring was suspended. I had a video in the room, and it was different. It talked about absence. Actually, it kind of it still alluded to it, but it was definitely about absence. And but adding the body, and then of course like my own body in the work, I can directly speak to those, to those issues. But yeah, like I'm definitely thinking of people who are on the margins of society a lot, like when I'm working performance.
Yeah. And I have a question while I'll play this video as well that you've provided of one of your performances. But I wanted to ask a question because you've been very helpful in my journey of understanding performance artwork. You sent a wonderful article to me, and I would love to have you sort of share with everyone, for those like myself who perhaps at first are not so comfortable with performance art because of the lack of understanding. What would you say to someone who's wanting to become more engaged in viewership of performance artwork?
Well, yeah, I mean, there's just so many different types and styles of performance out there. I am drawn like to more danced, movement-based performance work. Some ritualistic also work are appealing to me, but I tend to I tend to kind of like turn my eyes towards the stuff that's more like relatable. And since I have a background in dance, I kind of always find like I kind of want to see that more of that. Performance is complicated because it's just a lot of times artists are not giving the audience that much to go, you know, to jump from, and it kind of feels like a little bit alienating. I think one of my goals since I started working performance was to like open it up a little more and find ways to like allow people to enter the work. And I think that dance tends to do that. You know, it's like a language that is already known to most, and I think it's kind of a way, you know. So I don't know, trying to find ways that the artist is allowing you in. Not all performances are going to do that. Some performances are really difficult to enjoy. But I think that is a way, you know, for me, that's like, I'm always like, I look at it and then I try to figure out like, what about this work that it's I can connect to, you know?
Absolutely. I think what I've learned through my own experience of getting to know performance artwork is that it's like learning a language in the same way appreciating another art medium is learning a language. You're learning about that medium, how people communicate with it. And you're right, like dance was a really easy way for me to get involved with that and seek out more. So I'm really pleased that you've been so willing to share with me too, and sort of help me on that journey. And I'm excited to see more from you. For everyone at home, if you are interested in seeing more of Lorenzo's artwork, I'm going to go ahead and post a link to the Dropbox. So I do recommend bookmarking that so that you can save it after this is done. Someone said, can you share any texts and articles about performance? I'd be happy to send over the one that you provided with me. So I'm going to go ahead. I'm just putting my email address. So Gail, you asked that question. Take down this email address. I'd love to connect. And if anybody has questions for Lorenzo or is interested in one of his works to add to your collection, please get in contact, and we'd love to hook you up in conversation with him. Thank you everyone for joining, and thank you Lorenzo for taking the time out of your day to share with us.
Thank you so much. Thanks everybody for watching.
Of course, and thanks again. I just have to mention that we've got lots of thank yous in the chat and lots of claps. So thanks again, Lorenzo. Can't wait to see what else you're up to in the future. Bye now.
Bye.